Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a Q&A session about Populate. Today we've got Helen Lovel, one of our Neutrog staff members, and Dr Uwe Stroeher, who are going to run through some questions that we have received since the release of Populate. Some of these have come in through Facebook and email, and then there's a whole series that came in after our webinar that we ran recently. So we're hoping to cover off as many questions as we can over the course of 30 minutes. We'll start off with some questions that are very general, and then we'll go into some that are more specific. Hopefully, you'll stick around for all the questions because there's a lot to learn about this product. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to ask the questions, and Uwe, who's going to answer them.
Thanks very much, Zell. First of all, Uwe, one of the questions that we've been asked quite a lot is Populate a fertilizer?
And that's a good question. Yes, we do get that asked a lot. And no, it's not. It's really a soil probiotic or a soil drench. So the idea behind it is that it's simply there to repopulate the soil with your microbes. So you can still use it in combination with your fertilizer treatment. So it's not a fertilizer.
Okay, well, thank you. And another which we've all been asked quite regularly is, when should I apply Populate and how often?
Okay, because it's a living microbiological product, you want to apply it either in the late afternoon when there's not a lot of sunlight about. It's really critical that you keep those microbes out of direct UV light. So, and also water it in. So that's critical about actually the application itself. And how often you use it? Well, I generally recommend that people use Populate after they've had like an adverse event. And by an adverse event, I mean things like a drying event, a waterlogging event. And also, if you're using it in your vegetable patch, when you change from one crop to another, that's also a great time to reapply. So probably 2 to 3 times a year would be sufficient in most cases.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for that, Uwe. And can I use Populate as a foliar spray, and what rate would I mix it at?
Okay, so you can use Populate as a foliar spray. It's not designed per se as a foliar spray, but the microbes in there, especially the ones that are designed to protect from diseases, have quite a broad spectrum. So they may very well work even on a foliar spray or in a foliar spray. You would really sort of mix it in about the same ratio as you would do for the soil drench. I suggest for the foliar, because you're trying to do something very specific, maybe go to a 1 in 100 dilution and not 1 under 250. And just apply it and spray it out.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, that's terrific. And can I use Populate with natives if that's going to liberate the phosphorus in the soil?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's a couple of aspects here. Obviously, we do have phosphate liberating microbes in Populate, but what happens is that obviously they liberate the phosphate very slowly. So they don't liberate it like, for example, you would get in a fertilizer where you get a sudden flush. So it's less likely to affect natives. The other thing we've got to remember is that the microbes on native plants generally don't support phosphate liberating bacteria and fungi anyway. So they're unlikely to survive close to the root zone of many of the natives, simply because they don't actually select those microbes out. They actually discourage their growth.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. And another is, does Populate have the potential to reduce our need or vulnerability to phosphate supply, particularly in large-scale operations?
Certainly. I mean, phosphate is one of those nutrients of which there's actually plenty around. So there's normally a lot of phosphate in your soil. It's locked up. So the idea behind Populate is that it releases that phosphate. It makes it bioavailable. So we got to think about availability for plants. We call that bioavailable. So yes, you can use it in large operations. For example, you might be able to spray it as part of your seeding process if you're putting out a wheat crop or something like that, to liberate some of that phosphate that's already in your soil.
Yep. And would storing my Populate in a small garden shed, which becomes very hot in summer, cause deterioration of the product?
Well, yes, it does, in short. Cooking Populate is not the ideal way of treating it. I suggest that if you do have, even if you have something like an open carport is even better than a hot shed, or put it in your garage if you have. Under the laundry sink is another great place to store it, somewhere where it doesn't really get above about 40 or 45 degrees, but these garden sheds, they get to 70 degrees plus. It's not great.
Yeah, so basically somewhere where the temperature's reasonably stable most of the year.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And what can I expect to see when I apply Populate?
Oh, that's another fantastic question. So
Yeah.
I guess that there's a few things that Populate is designed to do, but one of the things that you should see increased plant vigor. Again, remembering this will only work if your plants are actually actively growing. So, if your plants are not growing in the middle of winter, you're not going to see much activity, but you should see an increase in plant growth. Potentially, you should also see a reduction in your plant disease levels, especially fungal diseases.
Okay. And another question is there a risk of introducing harmful microbes as well as beneficial microbes?
So yeah, that's another great question. And what we do is all the microbes that are in Populate, we've basically determined the DNA sequence of those, so we know exactly what they are. So in our screening process, we can, of course, occasionally come across a plant pathogen, for example. We don't put those into Populate. We know exactly what microbes are in there, so we exclude any that have a potential to cause diseases.
Yeah, and this is a question that I think will be really relevant to many people. Should I use GoGo Juice with Populate? And if so, can they be mixed?
Okay, you do not need to use GoGo Juice and Populate, either GoGo Juice or Populate. If you're mad keen, yes, you can mix them. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't. But I would say that if you're happy with GoGo Juice, give Populate a shot, and you'll probably see a remarkable difference. However, yes, you wouldn't use them together. They overlap quite significantly in their functions.
Yeah, and another one that I believe we've all been asked quite a bit lately is, Populate suitable for use in wicking beds in my backyard veggie patch?
Oh, certainly. I mean, again, it'll help to liberate some of those nutrients and cycle them through your wicking bed. So there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't put them into your wicking bed. In fact, some people might use them in a hydroponic system where they have even fish. You could introduce that into your pond. It wouldn't harm your fish. So yeah, no, you can certainly use it even in a system like that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think a lot of people will really be pleased to hear that. And another is, what is the best time to apply to my garden? Spring, autumn, you perhaps covered off on that a little bit earlier, but do you have any further specific thoughts on that, Uwe?
Well, I think the thing is that we've got to remember that the microbes, their function is really a lot dependent on temperature. So in the middle of winter, you're going to get very little activity. Spring is an ideal time. Autumn is an ideal time. And obviously, as I mentioned, if you've got a really hot, dry event, you should probably re-inoculate your soil. So in summer. In winter, it really depends. I mean, for something like winter vegetables, it'll be quite good. It is a little bit dependent on the plants. So when the plants are active is when you should really be applying Populate. Yeah.
And have we done any work, or have you done any work with Populate in managing brown rot in stone fruit?
That's another fantastic question. I love these ones. I actually just contacted the Department of Primary Industry in New South Wales to get some of the brown rot fungi into our lab so we can start testing to see if there is the ability to inhibit some of those. I mean, the microbes or the pathogen inhibitors in Populate have a very broad spectrum, so they do tend to inhibit quite a large range of different fungal pathogens. But I don't know specifically with brown rot. It's certainly a project that we're starting.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm sure everyone will be waiting to see what we have, what we find from that. And do we have a recommended program for Populate on tomatoes?
Oh, well, that's a very specific question, I guess. But certainly, if you're going to put out your seedlings, then that's a great period on when you might want to put out some Populate, because they do help to stimulate root development. So early on when you're planting your tomatoes out, certainly. And then because the microbes tend to live quite a long period of time in the soil, and when you are putting out tomatoes, your soil tends to stay moist and organically rich, you don't really need to apply it again until very much later. I would say maybe if you're trying to accelerate some fruit set, or you're trying to accelerate or hang on to some of those buds, so the flowers, then it's important that you have that potassium level, and Populate will help to liberate some potassium.
Yeah, oh, that's fabulous. And does Populate help with black spot on roses, Uwe?
I've actually had that question years ago, and no, I do not know. We have had some rose growers use Populate and GoGo Juice on black dot, or black spot, I should say.
Yep.
And they have seen some reduction, but we haven't done independent trials to see whether it works on black spot. But it goes back to that wide diversity of inhibitors.
Yes,
that
of
probably
course.
will do something. Yep.
Yeah. And does Populate help with established trees?
Well, okay, so I guess for established trees, you're probably less looking at trying to get lots of new root growth, but you're still looking at things like suppressing disease. So you're still looking at things like suppressing Phytophora, for example, or some of the other diseases that are affecting a lot of mature and older trees. So again, it will help. It's a bit of an insurance policy against getting those diseases into the older trees. So there is some advantage there, and obviously also the ability to liberate nutrients. It's always beneficial no matter how old the plant is.
Yeah, for sure. And should you water it in after application, assuming it's not a hot day?
Well, ideally, you would give it a little bit of a water. I mean, you don't have to put, you don't have to put 10 mils of water down, just enough to get those microbes out of the direct sunlight and out of direct drying. I always say to people, if you can sort of look up at the sky and you see the rain band coming, that's the ideal time to put it out. But if you do have to put it out, even just a quick water with a garden hose, just to water it in a little bit into the surface, just get it out of that drying and out of the UV. Yep.
Okay, that's fabulous. And would aerating a dilution improve the application, Uwe?
Not really. I mean, you could, in theory, do this by adding some molasses and making a bit of a brew. But the problem you have to remember is that then you're selecting very specifically for those microbes that like to use molasses. And so you're actually changing the whole dynamic or the microbiome of the populate. So, you potentially, by doing that, you might be driving away some microbes that don't like to be aerated, don't like to grow in the presence of, say, something like molasses. And the other things you've got to remember, that the populate also has a range of anaerobic microbes that are designed to work deeper in the soil profile. So by aerating it, you're actually killing those guys, and they can be quite useful as well. I mean, you've got to remember the soil has got a spectrum of oxygen from the surface all the way down, and if you really aerate aerate it strongly, you are killing those strict anaerobic microbes.
Okay, well, that was really good response to that. And another one that we have been asked is, this person says, I assume one can use sea mungus with Populate. Is this necessary?
Okay, so I'm assuming here we're talking about sea mungus pellets or liquid.
I would think so. Yeah.
I'm assuming pellets. That is actually my go-to cocktail, is to use sea mungus together with Populate. I think that the combination is probably the best out of all of them. I absolutely love it. My plants just jump out of their skin when I do that. So yes, sea mungus with Populate together. So throw those pellets down and get your watering can and just water it in. It's magical. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. Now, this is a great question. Have we done any work, or have you done any work on suppressing the pathogen armillaria?
Another great question. So
it is, isn't it?
Another project that we're just starting together with some of the botanic gardens around Australia. Armillaria is obviously a big problem around Australia at the moment. Lots and lots of mature trees are starting to suffer. Again, I'm in contact with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industry, their mycology unit, and I'll be getting some armillaria in. I'm just waiting to talk to the botanic gardens to work out exactly what trees and what species they're having problems with, so we can match our research with the need out there. But yes, it's another one of the projects on the list.
I know, and it's a very exciting one too. Yeah. Uwe, is Populate best used with young seedlings or with more established plants?
Well, I guess it goes back to that question earlier about trees and tomatoes. So again, for seedlings, absolutely great to try to stimulate that root development and to give that early protection against plant diseases when the plants are small and are more susceptible. Certainly, established plants also benefit. Again, disease protection and nutrient liberation. Perhaps, you're probably not looking at the same sort of level of root development, but you're certainly still trying to protect those plants from diseases and liberate things like potassium and phosphate.
Yes. And another person would like to know the rates used for foliar spraying on macadamias, and is food also required, such as kelp or humate for best benefits?
Okay, so that's another really great question. So obviously in the soil, there is food available for microbes. On the plant leaves, there's very little in the way of available food. But having said that, there is still some, because the leaves are actually quite full of microbes, so they do eke out a living there.
Yeah.
You don't really need to use kelp or humates. I mean, humates don't make a food for microbes anyway. They're more a housing thing. The whole idea about humates is that they're permanent. They can't really be broken down. And in regards to kelp really, again, isn't a food. It actually functions quite differently. It does things about water holding capacity and root development and that type of thing. So you don't need to add that for your foliar spray. And again, I would use that in regards to the application or the rates. Again, I'd probably go to 1 in 100, simply because it's not the ideal environment for them to be on. Yep. Versus 1 in 250, which is what our recommended dilution is.
Yeah. Thank you, Uwe. Another question is, will populate complement the biodynamic agricultural practices?
Okay. In theory, yes, it would, because simply the whole thing about biodynamic agriculture is that you're trying to stimulate those soil microbes. So certainly, you know, it fits exactly into the biodynamic or the organic fold when you're speaking about populate, or the idea behind populate. The issue we currently have with populate is that the preservative or the stasis agent we use can't be used in biodynamic or organic practices. So although the idea behind it is to be biodynamic or organic by stimulating those cell microbes and the biology, you can't use it in a biodynamic, say, registered farm. But we are working on getting a certified version that can be used in organic and biodynamic farming. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that would be good. I think a lot of people would be interested in that. Another one is, this person says, I hear that populate has now been sprayed onto sudden impact for lawns. How will this make a difference? And also, should I still water in my sudden impact for lawns? Okay,
so the idea here is that effectively what we're trying to do is we're trying to make use of some of the nutrients in the sudden impact for lawns and to liberate those. So the bugs in the populate, so those microbes will help that. They'll also help to stimulate root development, which is really important for lawns, especially this time of year where you're trying to sort of get them to kick off and sink deep roots in order to give you that resistance to heat stress. Should I still water it in with GoGo Juice? Ideally, yes, you would. You don't have to. We do have to make a bit of a caveat here that, you know, populate is a liquid, and so when we spray that onto a solid material, some of those microbes that are in that liquid don't really love being in that very dry environment. So you can supplement those missing microbes with GoGo Juice, so to speak.
Yeah, and it also is a great product too for all of your non-flowering plants, such as ferns and palms and hedges and that type of thing, Uwe.
Yeah, I use that for my hedges. So my box hedges all get sudden impact for lawn on them. Yep.
Yeah, same as mine. Uwe, would you recommend using this in a nursery setting, such as, you know, watering in after potting up, or just as a soil drench for pots before planting out?
Okay, so another great question. We're actually, again, doing a trial as we speak with an almond grower, looking exactly at this. So it's sort of similar in that they've just put the plants out into the ground, and now they're going to drench them with populate to see whether, you know, what happens in regards to development. Now, certainly in a nurserying setting, watering in after potting is ideal. We've got to remember populate not only has these plant growth hormone producing microbes in it, but it's also got a range of seaweeds in it. So again, you get that protection from the seaweed and the stress or the transplanting or repotting stress. And the last part of the question was, use it as a soil drench before planting out. Exactly what it's exactly what I would recommend people do. Yep.
Yeah. And I like this question. I mean, I like them all, but how do you identify the difference between beneficial microbes and harmful ones?
Yeah, okay. So that goes back to what we do, is where we basically determine the genome sequence. So with determining the genome sequence, we then know exactly what species is there. And I then take that information and I'll search the literature to see if any of those are known plant pathogens. So it's really a case of knowing what we've got, and from there we can then go, okay, that one is probably not desirable. So although it might work really well in a laboratory setting, we won't put that into populate. So really, that's how we determine the difference between beneficial and harmful. Having said that, there are beneficial microbes that can become harmful if a plant becomes very stressed. The same as, for example, they're called opportunistic pathogens. It's the same as when we get sick. Often it's not because they're necessarily a direct pathogen. They're opportunistic. They take an opportunity to do that, but that's just the way nature is. Yep.
Yeah. Will populate stop or suppress phoma disease in legume plants such as clover and vetch?
Okay. That's another good question. I'm pretty sure that question is the one that set me down the path of actually looking at this pathogen as well. Again, it's in the works. I can't tell you whether it does or doesn't. All I can say is because of the very broad spectrum of inhibitors that we have and the broad spectrum of fungal disease that inhibits, I would expect that it would probably also work in this setting, but I can't guarantee it at this point in time.
No. Is there an intention to see what the compatibility with potato and furrow fungicides like azoxystrobin? In the past, these have been used alongside trichoderma, bacillus, and also the streptomycin fungals.
So if we look at the trials that we've done where we've used Amistar Amistar is another furrow fungicide that's being used, and or I should say a furrow chemical that's being used in potatoes. And we do find that some of the microbes in populate don't like it. I mean, they basically get killed by very high concentrations. But we do find those, however, if you put the fungicide down first, and if you can then subsequently apply the populate a few days to a week later. I know that's difficult when you're doing it in a furrow, but then there isn't a problem. Now, the reason why some microbes don't get killed, things like trichodermas and maybe the penicilliums and the bacillus and that type of thing, is because they're spore formers, and spores are very, very resistant, so they don't get killed very readily even by fungicides. So they hang around, they wait for those fungicides to degrade or to be diluted, and then the microbes wake up. So in GoGo Juice, we have a combination of these things. So we have, trichoderma, we have penicilliums, we have bacillus species in there. So we do have some of those spore formers, but we have other microbes in there that are more delicate towards things like fungicides. So it gives you some benefit, but perhaps not the full benefit that you'd expect if you weren't using a fungicide. Yep.
Okay. And Uwe, we covered off on this, but it was part of another question earlier on. This is more direct. Do you consider populate organic?
Well, I consider populate done organic, and it is organic. I mean, none of the microbes in there are GMOs, so they're not genetically modified or anything. All the inputs we put in are actually ACO certified inputs.
Yeah.
So there's nothing going in there. It only falls over that very final step. In order to stop the bottles from swelling up and exploding on your shelf, we have to put in an inhibitor that basically slows or puts the microbes into stasis, and that inhibitor is what we can't allow as currently as an organic input. But again, we are working on getting an organically certified populate.
Oh, thank you, Uwe. I think that's a great way to respond to that question. Can populate be used to encourage healthy soil after removing a cherry tree that had bacterial canker?
Yes. All right. So that's a good question, because that really goes to the crux of this, what they call replant disease or sick soil disease, where you shouldn't put a plant back in, or the same plant back into the spot that it came from. So you wouldn't necessarily replant roses into an old rose bed, and that is a problem. Now, populate will suppress some of those. The ideal way to treat that soil is perhaps slightly differently. What I would do is I would plant something like a mustard, plow that in to biofumigate the soil, and then apply some populate, and perhaps even put some Mungus down. And after that, the soil has a chance to recover, and you should be able to replant pretty much anything in that spot. I would still be a little bit hesitant about replanting a cherry in the same spot, but it certainly does help to rejuvenate the soil and make it healthy again. What you're trying to do is a lot of these soils, what happens over time is that disease levels and the pathogens build up, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to push those back down and suppress them again. And that's what Populate does. It suppresses those pathogens, and together with a biofumigant like mustard or something similar, then you can recover that soil and get rid of some of those pathogens.
That's great. Thank you, Uwe. This is another excellent question. Does Populate reduce the need for crop rotation in the home garden?
Well, so that goes back to the thing about there's a couple of reasons why we rotate crops. Let's start that. Let's touch on that point first. One is if you keep planting the same crop, you deplete the nutrients that a specific crop may want. So let's take onions, for example. A square meter of onions takes about 5 grams of sulfur out of your soil. So that's quite a lot of sulfur. So, the first year it might work, the second year it might work, and the third year onions are looking pretty ordinary because they don't have enough sulfur anymore. Having said that, if you're putting it back in by the use of gigantic, then you don't get that nutrient depletion. But what does happen is over time is you also get that buildup of pathogens or undesirable microbes, because you're starting to get into like almost a monoculture within your veggie patch. So it's, again, Populate will help here. You probably have to do less crop rotation, but my personal view is that I still have at home I have 3 different beds, and I tend to rotate through those beds what I plant. Yep.
Exactly what we do in our veggie patch too, Uwe. Will Populate affect curly grub?
No.
Nope.
Simple answer. No, it will not.
Is Neutrog developing a liquid fertilizer for native plants?
Oh, well, that's a great question, and it'd be a fantastic thing to have. I think it's certainly on the plans and on the radar, so to speak.
It is.
Yeah, I think there's a huge, or a growing interest in liquids, simply because of the ease of application, and also you're not dependent on rainfall to wash stuff in. So yes, it's definitely something we're looking at.
Yeah. Uwe, have we used Populate on Banksias and native pea plants?
Okay, so we've got Angus Stewart on board as part of our how would you say it, control team, so to speak. So and he's done quite a lot of trials now with Populate on very sensitive natives, including things like kangaroo paws and even seedlings, and he's found no issues with Populate. So I think Populate is really safe to use on things like your Banksias and your native pea plants and all the rest. Just remembering that when Populate comes out of the bottle, it's got quite a low pH, so you do need to dilute it before you put it on. So don't just put it on in a neat format. More is not always better.
Oh, that's exactly right. And Angus is actually quite happy, or not happy is not the word. Angus is actually delighted with the results that he's got to date. So that's really exciting, and we'll be having a lot of further communication about that, in our newsletter and via social media. This question, Uwe, is: can you give more detail on Phytophora as a control, on Phytophora control, especially in garden beds?
Okay.
For roses, GoGo and Populate.
Okay. So we got a lot of really good questions, I'll be honest with you.
I know, it's great, isn't it? Yeah.
Great question. We've done some work on Phytophora control, certainly in larger settings such as orchards and that sort of thing, and we've seen some really good results. So in Populate, there's about 5 inhibitors specifically against Phytophora. Now, Phytophora is obviously not the same for every single location. There's several different species of Phytophora, but we've actually found that it works quite well for a range of things, so including camellias, lemon myrtles, tea trees, that sort of thing. I can't specifically mention or talk about roses because we haven't done a trial on roses, but I would expect, considering the results we've seen so far with Phytophora control, I would certainly expect it to work in roses.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure we covered off on this earlier. I'm sure we did actually, but the last question, you is, we're in the garden, using GoGo Juice or Populate, or just one of them?
I would use Populate because it has a broader spectrum of activity. But having said that, GoGo Juice is still a great product. I mean, it really, as a general go-to thing, I think it's still fantastic. You know, you can use it on your lawns, you can use it on your shrubs, you can use it anywhere. So it's really a decision, populate or GoGo Juice. And when people ask me the difference between them, I always say, well, it's a bit difference between me and Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, I might be able to lift, if I'm being generous, maybe 100 pounds above my head. And Arnie would bench press that with one arm. So populate is Arnie and GoGo Juice is me.
And that's a fabulous note to end on. Uwe, thank you so much. I've learned a lot from today's session. I'll certainly be going back to our website to listen to that again.
No problem.
Really...
I see one you've missed here, Helen.
Oh, have I?
In conjunction with Strikeback for orchids.
Oh, really?
So yes, it can be. You can use it in conjunction with Strikeback for orchids. Yeah. So yes, you can certainly use it in conjunction with Strikeback for orchids.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Strikeback for orchids is your fertilizer part, and your populate is your biology part. So yes, you can certainly use them together. And because populate isn't a fertilizer, you're not overloading the nutrients.
Yeah, and is it worth touching on, Uwe, when you're using one of our products like Strikeback for orchids with either GoGo Juice or populate? With populate, is it still correct that you mix up the organic product first, which is either the GoGo or the populate, and then break down your liquid, whether it's Sun Impact for roses or Strikeback for orchids, and then add them?
Yeah, you can do that. So you can basically, in a watering can, let's say, you can put your 40 mils of Strikeback for orchid liquid in and mix that in, and then basically put in your populate and mix that in and just do it all in one application. There's absolutely no reason you can't do that. I just wouldn't mix the two concentrates together. So I wouldn't, sort of take my populate bottle and tip half of it out and then, into a beaker and then top it up with Strikeback for orchids. You do have to do them separately. And that's only because one is a living biological product that has a lot of different microbes in it. And the Strikeback for orchid liquid also has microbes in it nowadays, because we also, preserve the living microbes in that product. But, it has got a lot more chemical aspects, so it's better to try to do them separately. Mix one and then mix the other, but you can do them together, apply them together,
Uwe, thank you so much. That has been so informative. We'll pass back to Hazel, and hopefully everyone's questions have been covered. But as Hazel said at the start of this webinar, any questions you've got, don't hesitate to jump on our website, use our 1800 number, or ask us questions via social media. So thank you again, Uwe. That was great.
Not a problem. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. I just want to thank both Helen and Uwe for their time in doing this. As you can see, we get a huge number of questions about all of our products, populate more so as it's our new release. But I think this has been a great format. I always learn a lot when I listen to Uwe, particularly as I now know that he and Arnie Schwarzenegger can be compared. But I think that what it points to is that we invite your questions and we welcome them. And if this is a great format to be able to answer them, we'll look forward to doing it again in the future. Anyway, thank you very much.
I'll be back.